Not because you're a Grand Slam champion. Not because you're a former world #1. Just because you're you, and tens of thousands of people across the globe have decided that wherever you play, they're going to be there. That is the reality Alexandra Eala is living right now. And Stuttgart has just become the latest city to discover exactly what that means. It started with an injury. Zheng pulled out of the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix, one of the most prestigious clay events on the entire WTA calendar. A WTA 500 loaded with 7 top 10 players, multiple Grand Slam winners, and former world #1s, the kind of stacked field that usually makes tournament directors very comfortable about ticket sales. Then the alternate list kicked in, and Alex stepped forward. No wild card, no backdoor invitation, no favors from anyone. She earned that spot on merit. The moment the announcement went live, something started happening that Stuttgart had never really prepared for. Fans weren't disappointed that Zheng was out. They were already on their phones booking flights, hotels, and tickets. See, the institutional tennis world has always run on a very straightforward formula. Better ranking equals bigger draw equals more revenue. A number 46 player replacing a top 10 name should mean softer sales, quieter sessions, and maybe a few disappointed fans in the stands. That's the formula. That's how it has always worked. Alex Eala has spent the entire 2026 season making that formula look completely ridiculous. Think back to Indian Wells. Her matches got scheduled, and resale prices for those sessions shot past $1,000. Not for a Legends comeback. Not for a semi-final between top seeds. For a young Filipino player grinding through the early rounds of a hard-court tournament. People watching the ticket markets closely said listings were tripling within hours of draw confirmations. That is not normal tennis economics. That is something entirely different. Then came Linz. If Indian Wells was the warning shot, Linz was the undeniable proof. Reports from that tournament suggested that roughly 90% of the tickets for Eala's matches were bought by Filipino fans. 90%. Sessions that would normally be half-empty on midweek afternoons became packed, loud, flag-waving, standing-room-only experiences. The atmosphere in those arenas felt nothing like what the rankings on paper would suggest. It felt like a home tournament for a player who was technically the visitor. And now Stuttgart is next. Here's what makes this particular moment so fascinating. The timeline is brutally compressed. The announcement that Alex was replacing Zheng dropped on a Monday. The draw came out on Wednesday, revealing she would open against Leylah Fernandez. The tournament's opening weekend was set for Friday. 72 hours. That was all the time her fans had to figure out flights, book hotels, secure tickets, and coordinate across multiple countries. If you think that sounds like not enough time, you have clearly never witnessed what this fanbase is capable of when they're motivated. Because 72 hours was more than enough for the Eala army to completely change the commercial landscape of a European tennis tournament. The match itself carries its own weight, completely separate from the commercial chaos surrounding it. Alex versus Leylah Fernandez. 2 left-handers. 2 players with Filipino roots. Fernandez representing the diaspora as a Filipino-Canadian, and Eala representing the Philippines itself. Philippine sports media picked up on this immediately and began framing the match as something far bigger than a first-round contest between 2 WTA professionals. It became a cultural moment before a single ball was struck. That kind of narrative doesn't just bring casual attention. It brings full investment, the kind where people set alarms, book time off work, and refresh ticket sites for hours. The Porsche Tennis Grand Prix has 47 years of history. Its trophy cabinet includes names like Martina Navratilova, Steffi Graf, and Maria Sharapova. The winner takes home a Porsche 911 and prize money exceeding €160,000. This is not some minor tour stop tucked away on a forgettable week of the calendar. It sits right in the heart of the European clay season, a critical stop before Roland Garros, where careers can shift and rankings can move significantly. When tournament officials put out their statement welcoming Alex into the draw and telling fans to look forward to seeing her play, they probably meant it as standard professional courtesy. But those words landed very differently among the people who have been following her story all season. Because looking forward is exactly what they were already doing, just in a much more literal, logistically involved, passport-required kind of way. Now here's where the story gets genuinely interesting beyond just the tickets and the crowd noise. What's unfolding around Alex isn't just a passionate fan base showing up in big numbers. It's an entire commercial ecosystem responding to something the WTA's traditional models were never built to measure. Nike is reportedly exploring long-term sponsorship conversations. BPI and Globe Telecom are doubling down on their commitments. Jollibee and Milo are activating her ambassador status across Southeast Asian markets. The financial world around her is behaving as if she is already a top 10 player, because by every commercial measure that actually matters to sponsors and broadcasters, she kind of already is. Rankings measure what happens on the court in terms of points and results. They don't measure what happens to a venue's revenue the moment her name appears in a draw. They don't measure what happens to a broadcast's viewership numbers when Filipino fans across Europe, North America, and Asia all tune in simultaneously. That gap between ranking and market power is what's making tournament directors pay very close attention right now. And Stuttgart is just the beginning of this particular stretch of the calendar. After Stuttgart comes Madrid, then Rome, then Roland Garros itself. That's 6 weeks of clay court tennis, where, if Alex keeps advancing, the same commercial pressure test will repeat itself in bigger and bigger venues. Tournament directors at every single one of those stops are watching Stuttgart this week with genuine interest, because what happens here informs how they think about scheduling, court assignments, broadcasting arrangements, and all the logistical decisions that operations teams make weeks in advance. The WTA has a ranking system built around individual achievement, and rightly so. Results reflect performance. Performance determines seedings and draws. That system works exactly as intended. But it was never designed to account for a situation where a player's market power dwarfs her ranking by this kind of margin. And right now, that is exactly the situation they are in, whether they fully acknowledge it publicly or not. There is a phrase analysts use in sports business, when attendance figures and broadcast numbers tell a different story than the rankings suggest. They talk about players who are bigger than their position on paper. It is usually said about veterans at the end of dominant careers, players whose historical reputations still drive interest even as their results decline. Alex is only 20 years old, and it is already being said about her in the opposite direction. A player whose cultural weight and commercial pull are running well ahead of a ranking that is, by any objective standard, already very impressive for her age. She came into Stuttgart off a tough loss in Linz. That match hurt. She had Ostapenko on the ropes in the second set, had chances to push it to a decider, and couldn't quite close it out. She lost 6-4, 7-5 in a contest that felt like it could have gone differently. That is the kind of result that stings specifically because it was so close. Not a blowout, not a bad day, just a match that slipped away at the moments that mattered most. She didn't make excuses. She didn't post anything dramatic. Within 2 days of that loss, she was already on her way to Germany, preparing for a main draw opportunity that, if you are being honest about how tennis works, most players ranked 46 simply do not get on that kind of stage. The back-to-back nature of Linz and Stuttgart, the loss followed immediately by a premium draw entry, says something powerful about where she is in this moment. The tour keeps moving. The opportunities keep coming. And her job is to be ready when they do. The Fernandez match is the starting point. But the bigger question surrounding Stuttgart is whether this is the event where the conversation truly shifts. Every tournament before this one has been slightly surprised. Indian Wells was surprised. Linz was surprised. The pattern is clear enough now that Stuttgart shouldn't be surprised. And yet the real question is whether any tournament can actually prepare for the Eala effect in advance rather than just reacting to it after it has already happened. Ticket markets are one thing. Atmosphere in the arena is something else entirely. There is a specific energy that builds in a venue when one section of the crowd has traveled farther and cares more viscerally than anyone else in the building. It changes the sound. It changes the tension. It changes the entire experience for everyone watching, including the players on court. Alex has been playing in front of that energy all season. She is familiar with it. The question is always whether her opponents are ready for it. Because walking out against what feels like a home crowd, when you are technically the higher seed or the more experienced player, is its own unique challenge that does not show up anywhere in the match statistics. What Stuttgart represents in the broader arc of this story is a checkpoint. Indian Wells proved the effect was real. Linz proved it was repeatable. Stuttgart, with its brutally compressed timeline, its cultural first-round matchup, and its position at the front of the clay season, is going to prove whether it is accelerating. And everything we have seen from the Eala army this year suggests that acceleration is exactly what is happening. The flags in the stands have multiplied from event to event. The ticket purchases have gotten faster and more coordinated. The media coverage surrounding her appearances has grown in scope and intensity. What started as a passionate fanbase showing up in impressive numbers has turned into something more organized, more strategic, and more visible than anything the women's tour has seen around a player outside the very top of the rankings in a long time. So when you watch what happens at the Porsche Arena this week, understand that you are watching something that goes beyond one match, one tournament, or even one season. You are watching a story about how markets respond to cultural significance, about how sporting institutions adapt when their existing frameworks don't fully capture what is in front of them, and about what happens when a 20-year-old from the Philippines shows up in Stuttgart with a 46 next to her name and somehow becomes the most commercially significant player in the draw. The clay season runs all the way to Paris. Every week between now and Roland Garros is another chapter. And if you have been watching closely enough to understand what has already happened this year, you already know that Stuttgart isn't the peak of this story. It might not even be the halfway point.